Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Michael Williams. I had just turned 34 when we arrived at Hocking Hills, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The October air was crisp when Sarah and I pulled our Winnebago into Cedar Grove RV Park, nestled deep in the rolling hills of southeastern Ohio. The leaves were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds that made the forest look like it was on fire. Sarah pressed her face against the passenger window, her breath fogging the glass as she took in the scenery. "It's perfect, Mike," she said, squeezing my hand. Just what we needed. I wanted to believe her. After 18 months of marriage counseling, of fighting about everything from my drinking to her mother to the baby we'd lost last spring. This trip was supposed to be our fresh start. The Hocking Hills region had always been special to us. We'd hiked these trails during our college years at Ohio University, back when everything felt possible. The RV park was nearly empty, just a handful of other campers scattered among the wooded sites. Our spot was at the far end, closest to the Buckeye Trail that wound through the old-growth forest toward Old Man's Cave. The park manager, a weathered man named Earl with suspicious eyes, gave us the rundown as we checked in. "You folks picked a good time to visit," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Most people clear out after Labor Day. Gets quiet around here." "That's what we're hoping for," Sarah said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Earl studied us both for a long moment. "You planning on hiking the deep trails? The ones that branch off toward Cantwell Cliffs?" "Maybe," I said. "We used to hike all through here in college." That was then. Earl's weathered fingers drummed against the counter. "Stick to the main trails, the marked ones, and don't go out after dark, not even to the bathhouse. You need something, you come get me." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Is there some kind of problem?" she asked. "Probably nothing," Earl said, but his eyes said different. "Just 3 campers went missing last month. Never did find them. Their RV was still here, dinner still warm on the table. Like they just walked away." A chill ran down my spine, but Sarah laughed it off. "Come on, Earl, you're trying to scare the city folks." Earl didn't smile back. "I've lived in these hills for 63 years, ma'am. Some things don't need explaining, just respecting." We set up camp as the sun began its descent behind the canopy. Our Winnebago was a 2019 model, all the modern conveniences, full kitchen, queen bed, satellite TV, but out here, surrounded by trees that seemed to press closer as darkness fell, it felt fragile as a paper cup. Sarah made dinner while I connected the utilities. The normalcy felt forced, like we were actors playing at being happy. She hummed while she cooked. Something she used to do all the time before the miscarriage, before the silence that had grown between us like a tumor. "Remember when we camped out here with Dave and Kelly senior year?" she said, stirring pasta on the propane stove. "That thunderstorm that came out of nowhere?" I did remember. We'd all huddled in Dave's tiny dome tent, laughing and drinking cheap beer while lightning split the sky. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Yeah," I said. "Simpler times." She nodded, not looking at me. "Maybe we can find our way back to that." After dinner, we sat outside on our camp chairs, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge through the canopy. The forest was alive with sounds. Rustling leaves, distant owl calls, the crack of branches settling. But underneath it all was something else. A stillness that felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked suddenly. I listened. At first, nothing. Then I heard it too. A sound like humming. So faint it might have been the wind, but there was no wind. "Probably another camper," I said, though the sound seemed to come from deeper in the woods. Sarah shivered and pulled her jacket tighter. "Let's go inside." We made love that night for the first time in months, desperate and clinging, like we were trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Afterwards, Sarah fell asleep with her head on my chest, and for a moment, I let myself believe we might actually save our marriage. I was awakened sometime after midnight by the sound of our RV door opening. I lay still, listening. Sarah was pressed against me, her breathing deep and even. The door creaked on its hinges, and I heard footsteps on the metal steps. Someone was coming inside. My heart hammered as I slipped out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept in the closet. The main living area was dark, lit only by the green glow of the microwave clock. I could make out a figure standing near the kitchen, perfectly still. "Who's there?" I whispered. The figure turned, and in the dim light I could see it was Sarah. But that was impossible. Sarah was still in bed behind me. This Sarah smiled, but it was wrong somehow. Too wide, too knowing. "Come outside, Mike," she said in Sarah's voice. "I want to show you something." I glanced back toward the bedroom. The bed was empty. When I turned back, the other Sarah was gone. The door hung open, cool night air flowing in. I found Sarah standing 20 feet from our RV, still in her pajamas, staring into the woods. Her feet were bare, and she didn't seem to feel the cold. "Sarah?" I approached slowly. "What are you doing out here?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something I couldn't see between the trees. I followed her gaze but saw only darkness. "Sarah," I said louder, touching her shoulder. She blinked and looked at me confused. "Mike, what? Why are we outside?" "You don't remember?" She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "I was dreaming. There was a woman calling to me. She said she had something to show me. I guided her back inside, checking the locks twice before we went back to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds of the forest, wondering what the woman in Sarah's dream might have wanted to show her. The next morning dawned gray and humid, unseasonably warm for October. Sarah claimed to remember nothing about the night before, but she was different. Distant, distracted. She kept looking toward the tree line like she was waiting for something. "Let's hike the trail to Old Man's Cave," I suggested over coffee. "Like we used to." "Sure," she said, but her enthusiasm felt hollow. We packed a lunch and set off on the familiar trail. The Buckeye Trail was well maintained, marked with blue blazes painted on trees every few hundred yards. But as we walked deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd. The blazes seemed to be leading us away from the main trail, down a narrower path I didn't remember. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked Sarah, who was walking ahead of me. "Trust me," she said without turning around. "I know where we're going." The trees grew thicker, older. Some of the trunks were massive, easily 4 feet across, their canopy so dense that very little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The air grew cooler, and I could smell something earthy and stale, like wet leaves and decay. We'd been walking for over an hour when we came to a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a single enormous oak tree, its trunk scarred and twisted. Carved into the bark were symbols, not letters or numbers, but strange angular marks that hurt to look at directly. "Sarah, we should go back," I said. This place felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. But Sarah was already approaching the tree, her hand outstretched to touch the carved symbols. "Don't," I said sharply. She froze, her fingers inches from the bark. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "Can't you see how beautiful they are?" I couldn't. To me, they looked like scars, like wounds that had never healed properly. "Sarah, look at me." She turned, and for just a moment her eyes were completely black. No iris, no pupil, just solid darkness. Then she blinked, and they were normal again. "I think we should head back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The walk back seemed to take longer, though we were supposedly retracing our steps. The blue blazes were harder to spot, sometimes seeming to appear on trees we'd already passed. By the time we made it back to the RV, the sun was setting, though I could have sworn we'd only been gone a few hours. Sarah went straight inside and lay down, claiming a headache. I stayed outside, studying the map of the area I'd bought at the visitor center. According to the map, there was no clearing where we'd found that tree. The trail we'd taken didn't exist. That night, Sarah sleepwalked again. I woke to find her standing in the kitchen, completely still, staring out the window toward the woods. when I called her name, she didn't respond. I watched her for nearly an hour before she finally turned and walked back to bed, her eyes never opening. The next morning, she couldn't remember any of it. "I think we should leave," I said over breakfast. Sarah looked up from her coffee, surprised. "Why? We just got here." "You've been different. The sleepwalking. That trail yesterday." "What trail?" she asked. I stared at her. "The one to the clearing, with the tree." Sarah frowned. "Mike, we hiked to Old Man's Cave yesterday. We had lunch by the waterfall, remember? You took pictures." I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the photos from yesterday. She was right. There were pictures of us at Old Man's Cave, at the waterfall. Sarah, smiling, her eyes bright and normal. But I had no memory of taking them. "I think maybe you're the one who's been different," Sarah said gently. "You've been stressed about work, about us. Maybe you're having some kind of—" "I'm not having a breakdown," I snapped. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. What if she was right? What if the stress of our failing marriage, of trying to keep it together, had finally gotten to me? That afternoon, while Sarah napped, I decided to explore on my own. I needed to find that clearing again, to prove to myself that it was real. I followed what I thought was the same path, but the forest seemed different in daylight. The trees weren't as thick, the shadows not as deep. I was about to give up when I heard singing. It was a woman's voice, clear and beautiful, echoing through the trees. The melody was haunting, wordless, but somehow familiar. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, off any marked trail. The singing led me to a small pond I'd never seen before, its surface perfectly still and black as oil. On the far shore stood a woman in a white dress, her long dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She was facing away from me, still singing. "Hello," I called out. She stopped singing and turned. Even from across the pond, I could see her smile. It was Sarah's face, but wrong somehow. Too pale, too perfect. "Hello, Michael," she said in Sarah's voice. "I've been waiting for you." "You're not Sarah." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Aren't I? I'm everything Sarah could be. Everything she was before the sadness took her." "What do you want?" "I want to help. Your Sarah is broken, isn't she? All that grief, all that guilt. But I'm not broken. I could love you the way she used to." The woman, the thing, began walking around the pond toward me. With each step, she looked more like Sarah, but a version of Sarah from years ago. Before the miscarriage, before the fights, before the slow erosion of everything we'd built together. "She walks in her sleep because she's trying to come to me," the thing said. "She knows what I am, what I can give her." "Stay away from her," I said, backing up. "But Michael, she wants this. She wants to let go of all that pain. And you want her to, don't you? You want your old Sarah back." I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear laughter following through the trees. I burst out of the woods near our campsite, gasping and wild-eyed. Sarah was sitting outside the RV, reading a book. "Mike, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost told her everything, but as I looked at her face, tired, sad, but definitely human, I realized how insane it would sound. A doppelganger in the woods, offering to replace her? No, she'd think I'd finally snapped. "Just got turned around on the trail," I said. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. That night, I lay awake watching Sarah sleep, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up to find the thing from the pond in bed beside me. Every small sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Around 3 a.m., Sarah got up again. This time, I was ready. I followed her outside, staying far enough back that she wouldn't see me. She walked past the other RVs, past the bathhouse to the edge of the campground where the forest began. There, waiting in the darkness, was the woman from the pond. They stood facing each other for a long moment, and I could hear them talking, though I couldn't make out the words. Then the thing reached out and touched Sarah's face, and Sarah smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen since we'd arrived. They began walking together into the woods. I followed, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. They walked for what felt like miles, deeper and deeper into the forest, until we reached the clearing with the carved tree. Other figures were waiting there. 12 people, maybe more, standing in a circle around the oak. In the moonlight, I could see that they were all wrong somehow. Too tall, or with too many fingers, or faces that didn't quite match their bodies. Doppelgangers, all of them. Sarah stood in the center of the circle, and the thing that wore her face began to circle her, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The carved symbols on the tree began to glow with a sickly green light. I had to stop this. Whatever was happening, I couldn't let them take her. I charged into the clearing, shouting Sarah's name. The figures turned toward me, their faces shifting and changing, showing me glimpses of people I'd known, people I'd loved, people I'd lost. Sarah, wake up. I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Her eyes opened, and for a moment they were completely black. Then she blinked, and the familiar brown returned. Mike, where? How did we get here? The other figures began to close in on us. Their leader, the thing with Sarah's face, smiled sadly. You shouldn't have interfered, Michael. She was so close to letting go. Run, I whispered to Sarah. We ran. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit. Not footsteps, but something else. A rustling like wind through leaves, but wrong. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our skin, until we burst out of the woods near the campground. Earl was waiting for us, shotgun in hand. Get in your RV, he said without preamble. Get your things and go. Now. What's going on? Sarah asked, still confused. The same thing that's been going on for 50 years, Earl said. They take people, replace them, and once they've got their hooks in you, he looked at Sarah with pity. It's already started, hasn't it? I knew what he meant. Even now, standing in the harsh light of the campground security lamps, Sarah kept glancing back toward the woods with something like longing. We packed quickly, throwing our belongings into the RV with shaking hands. As we pulled out of the campground, I saw Earl in my rearview mirror, still standing guard. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached Columbus. Sarah slept fitfully in the passenger seat, muttering in her sleep. Sometimes the words were in English. So beautiful. Let me go. Don't want to hurt anymore. Sometimes they weren't in any language I recognized. At a truck stop outside the city, she woke up and looked at me with eyes that were slightly too dark. We should go back, she said. I think I left something there. No, I said firmly. We're going home. She smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. Of course, honey, you're right. That was 6 months ago. We're home now, back in Cincinnati, back to our regular lives. Sarah returned to work at the insurance company. I went back to my job at the engineering firm. To everyone else, we seem fine. Better, even. Sarah is happier, more energetic. She stopped talking about the baby we lost. She smiles more, but I know the truth. The Sarah who came back from Hocking Hills isn't my Sarah. She's close enough to fool everyone, including herself most of the time. But there are differences. She doesn't remember our first date anymore. She can't recall the name of the dog we had when we were first married. And sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, her smile becomes something else entirely. The real Sarah is still out there, somewhere in those woods. I've gone back twice, searching, but I can never find the clearing again. Earl retired and moved away the week after we left. The new park manager has never heard of any missing campers. The thing wearing Sarah's face is a good replacement. Loving, attentive, everything I thought I wanted our marriage to be. She doesn't sleepwalk anymore. She doesn't cry over the baby. She doesn't bring up divorce or counseling or any of the problems that were tearing us apart. Sometimes I wonder if I should just accept it. Be grateful for this version of Sarah who loves me without reservation, who never fights with me, who smiles that perfect smile. But then I'll catch her staring out the window toward the southeast, toward those rolling hills where the real Sarah is still waiting. And I'll know that no matter how perfect this replacement is, she's not mine. The real Sarah is still out there, somewhere in the darkness between the trees, and I'm going to find her, even if it kills me. because the thing wearing my wife's face isn't Sarah, and I think it's getting hungry for more. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Salt Fork State Park. I'm Jessica Davis, and I was 29 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The old Coachman RV wheezed as I pulled into the campground, black smoke coughing from the exhaust. I'd bought the 1987 model for $3,000 cash, all I could afford after the divorce. It was supposed to be my freedom machine, my ticket to starting over. Instead, it felt like a rolling prison cell, cramped and smelling of mildew and someone else's broken dreams. Salt Fork State Park sprawled across southeastern Ohio like a green blanket. All rolling hills and dense forest wrapped around a massive lake. I'd chosen it because it was far from everything I was running from. The house in Toledo, the job at the law firm where everyone knew about David's affair, the sympathetic looks that made me want to scream. The campground host was a thin woman named Dolores with nervous eyes and fingers that never stopped moving. She kept glancing at my RV like it might explode. "You picked Site 47, she said, consulting her clipboard. "That's way back in the woods. You sure you want to be all alone out there?" "That's exactly what I want," I said. Dolores bit her lip. "Well, if you need anything, use the emergency call box by the bathhouse. We've been having some technical difficulties with cell service lately." I didn't think much of it at the time. Remote campground, spotty cell towers. It made sense. It wasn't until later that I understood what she really meant. Site 47 was at the end of a gravel road that wound deep into the forest. The trees closed in around my RV like green walls, oak and maple and hickory so thick they blocked out most of the afternoon sun. My neighbors were a family with young kids about a quarter-mile back, and beyond that, nothing but wilderness. I spent the first day setting up camp and trying to convince myself that this was healing, that solitude in nature would somehow patch the hole David had torn in my chest. I read a paperback romance novel in my lawn chair, drank wine from a box, and listened to the sounds of the forest. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant hum of insects. And something else, a sound just at the edge of hearing, like static from an old radio. That first night I tried to call my sister Linda to let her know I'd arrived safely. My phone showed full bars, but every call dropped immediately. I could dial out, hear it ringing, but the moment someone picked up, the line went dead. I figured it was the RV's metal shell interfering with the signal. Cell phones were finicky things. The next morning, I decided to hike the Buckeye Trail that ran through the park. I needed exercise, needed to feel like I was moving forward instead of just hiding. The trail wound through beautiful hardwood forest, past rocky outcroppings and small streams. I'd been walking for about an hour when I met the family. They were standing in a small clearing, all four of them. Mother, father, and two children around 8 and 10 years old. They were perfectly still, like mannequins, facing east toward a grove of pine trees. "Excuse me," I called out. "Are you folks okay?" None of them turned. None of them moved at all. I approached slowly, my heart starting to race. The parents were middle-aged, dressed in hiking clothes that looked expensive. The children wore matching red jackets. All four had the same blank expression, eyes wide and staring. "Hello?" I touched the woman's shoulder. She was cold. Not dead cold, but wrong cold, like she'd been standing in a freezer. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. That static sound coming from the direction they were all staring. It was louder here, more defined, almost like voices. The man's head snapped toward me so fast I stumbled backward. His eyes were the color of television snow, gray and flickering. "Do you hear it too?" he asked in a voice like grinding metal. I ran. Back at my campsite, I tried calling 911, but the calls wouldn't go through. I tried the park office, tried Linda, tried anyone. Nothing worked. The phone would ring once, twice, then cut to static. That night, I locked myself in the RV and tried to convince myself that the family had been playing some kind of game. Performance art, maybe. Harmless weirdos. But I couldn't shake the image of those gray, flickering eyes. Around midnight, I heard footsteps circling my RV. Slow, deliberate steps in the gravel. I turned off all my lights and peered through the window blinds. In the moonlight, I could see them. The family from the trail. They walked in a perfect circle around my RV, maintaining exactly the same distance from each other, their eyes fixed straight ahead. I watched them for an hour before they finally disappeared back into the woods. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt around my RV, but they were wrong somehow. Too deep in some places, too shallow in others. Like the people making them weighed different amounts with each step. I decided to pack up and leave. Whatever was going on here, I wanted no part of it. But my RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over fine, but the moment I put it in gear, it died. Every time. I checked the fluids, the belts, everything I could think of. Nothing wrong that I could see, but the damn thing refused to move. I walked to the camp office to ask for help, but found it empty. A sign on the door said, "Back in 30 minutes," but the edges of the paper were curled and yellow, like it had been there for weeks. The emergency call box by the bathhouse was dead. When I picked up the handset, there was only that static sound. That's when I realized that I hadn't seen another living person since I'd arrived. The family with kids from Site 43 was gone. Their RV's still there, but no signs of life. No smoke from their campfire, no children's voices, nothing. I was alone in a campground that should have had dozens of people. That afternoon, I hiked every trail I could find, looking for other campers, for park rangers, for anyone. The trails were well maintained but empty. I found several more clearings where people had obviously been standing for long periods, circular depressions in the grass, scuff marks in the dirt, all facing the same direction, toward the center of the park. The static was getting louder. By evening, it was constant, a low hiss that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could hear it even inside my RV with all the windows closed. And underneath it, something else. Voices, speaking in overlapping whispers that I couldn't quite understand. I tried to write in my journal, tried to document what was happening, but my hands kept shaking. The words came out wrong, letters that didn't belong to any alphabet I knew. That night, they came back. Not just the family this time. There were others. Dozens of them, walking in concentric circles around my RV. Men, women, children, all with those same gray, flickering eyes. Some wore modern clothes, others looked like they'd been dressed decades ago. All of them walked with that same mechanical precision. I huddled in my bed, covers pulled over my head like a child, listening to the sound of their footsteps. Gravel crunching in perfect rhythm, around and around and around. And the static was so loud now that it hurt. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to silence. Pale morning light filtered through my blinds, and the footsteps were gone. But when I looked outside, the grass around my RV was trampled in perfect circles, like crop circles but made by human feet. I tried the RV again, still wouldn't move. That's when I decided to follow them. I'd seen the direction they all faced, heard the static getting stronger toward the center of the park. Whatever was happening, the answer was there. Maybe if I found the source, I could find a way out. I packed a day pack with water and snacks and headed east, following game trails and compass bearings toward the heart of Salt Fork. The static got louder with every step, and the voices underneath became clearer. They were speaking English, but the words were all wrong. "Come and see," they whispered. "Come and see what we've become." The trees started changing as I walked deeper. The bark looked diseased, covered in strange growths that pulsed like heartbeats. The leaves were the wrong colors, purple and silver and blue-black, and there were symbols carved into the trunks, similar to the ones I'd seen in my journal, but somehow more complex. After 2 hours of hiking, I found them. The clearing was enormous, maybe 200 yards across with a small hill at the center. On top of the hill stood a tower. Not metal or wood, but something that looked grown rather than built. It spiraled up about 60 feet, covered in the same pulsing growths I'd seen on the trees. And around it, standing in perfect concentric circles, were hundreds of people. They faced the tower, absolutely motionless, their eyes reflecting the gray light that pulsed from the structure. I recognized some of them. the family from the trail, campers I'd seen in pictures at the park office, people wearing clothes from different decades. Some looked fresh, recently arrived. Others seemed weathered, like they'd been standing there for years. The static was deafening now, and through it I could hear the voices clearly. They were all speaking in unison, a chant in that same unknown language I'd been writing in my journal. At the base of the tower, I saw her, Dolores, the campground host, but not the nervous, twitchy woman I'd met at check-in. This Dolores stood perfectly still, her eyes gray and flickering, her mouth moving in time with the chant. I started to back away, but it was too late. Every head in the clearing turned toward me in perfect synchronization. Hundreds of gray eyes fixed on mine. "Jessica," they said in unison, their voices combining into a sound like breaking glass. "We've been waiting for you." I ran. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not running. They moved too precisely for that, but walking, all of them, their footsteps creating a thunderous rhythm that shook the ground. I crashed through the diseased forest, branches tearing at my clothes, that alien light growing dimmer behind me. But I could still hear them, a steady procession following at their measured pace. I reached my RV as the sun was setting, gasping and bloody from my flight through the thorns. To my amazement, the engine started on the first try. I didn't question it. I threw the RV in gear and floored it, gravel spraying as I tore down the campground road. In my mirrors, I could see them emerging from the tree line, hundreds of figures walking in formation, their eyes glowing in the growing darkness. I drove all night, not stopping until I reached Columbus. Only then did I allow myself to believe I'd escaped. But I was wrong. The static followed me home to Toledo. Faint at first, just at the edge of hearing, but growing stronger every day. My cell phone started acting up again, calls dropping, strange voices whispering in languages I didn't recognize. And I started sleepwalking. I'd wake up in my backyard, facing southeast toward Salt Fork, my bare feet muddy and cold. Linda found me like that 3 times before she insisted I see a doctor. The doctor prescribed sleeping pills, but they didn't help. If anything, they made it worse. In my drugged sleep, I could hear the voices more clearly, calling to me, welcoming me back. The symbols started appearing too. I'd find them drawn on my bathroom mirror in condensation, scratched into the frost on my car windshield, traced in the dust on my coffee table. Always the same complex patterns, always pointing southeast. I tried to research what had happened at Salt Fork, but found nothing. No reports of missing campers, no strange phenomena. The park's website showed normal operation, happy families enjoying Ohio's natural beauty. But I knew better. 3 weeks after I came home, I woke up to find my front door standing open. Muddy footprints led from my bedroom to the threshold. My footprints. I'd been walking again, but this time I'd almost made it outside. That's when I knew they were calling me back. The static is constant now, drowning out television, radio, even my own thoughts. I can hear them in there, all those voices, chanting in perfect unison, welcoming me home. I've been fighting it for 2 months, but I'm getting weaker. Last night I woke up in my car, halfway to Salt Fork, with no memory of leaving the house. I'm losing time, losing myself to whatever calls from that tower in the woods. I'm writing this as a warning, though I don't know if anyone will believe it. Stay away from Salt Fork State Park. Don't go camping alone in remote sites. And if you hear static where there shouldn't be any, if your phone starts acting strange, if you see people standing too still in the forest, run. Run before they add your voice to the signal. I can feel them calling to me now, hundreds of voices speaking as one, promising peace, promising an end to the pain David left behind. They're offering to take away everything that hurts, to make me part of something larger, something eternal. And God help me. It sounds so tempting. The keys to my car are in my hand. I don't remember picking them up, but there they are. My feet are already moving toward the door. I should fight this. I should call Linda, call the police, call someone. But the static is so loud now, and the voices are so welcoming, and I'm so tired of being alone. Maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe joining them is better than staying broken. The tower is calling, and I think I'm finally ready to answer. If you find this journal, remember what I've told you. Salt Fork isn't safe. The campground is a trap, and the tower in the woods is hungry for new voices. But I won't be alone anymore. I'll be part of the signal, part of the eternal conversation that echoes through the forest. My voice will join the chorus, calling to other lost souls, other broken people looking for somewhere to belong. Come and see, we'll whisper. Come and see what we've become. The door is open. The car is waiting. The signal is calling me home. We should have never gone to Wayne National Forest. I'm Robert Johnson. I was 42 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The Jayco Eagle fifth wheel was supposed to be our retirement practice run. Margie and I had bought it brand new, all 36 feet of luxury on wheels, complete with slide-outs, satellite TV, and a king-sized bed. After 23 years of marriage and raising our kids, we were finally going to see America together. First stop, Wayne National Forest, Margie said, spreading the Ohio map across our kitchen table back in Dayton. Look at all that green space, Bobby. Miles and miles of wilderness. I should have paid more attention to why all that green space was empty. Wayne National Forest sprawled across southeastern Ohio like a forgotten wound. 250,000 acres of reclaimed strip mine land that nature had slowly been trying to heal for decades. The camping area we'd reserved was called Burr Oak Cove, tucked deep in the Athens unit where cell service was spotty and the nearest town was 40 minutes away. Margie was 61 but looked younger, her auburn hair still thick and her green eyes bright with the kind of excitement she'd had when we were dating. Me, I felt every one of my 42 years in my creaking joints and expanding waistline. But seeing her happy made the aches worth it. It'll be like a second honeymoon, she said as we pulled into the campground on a gray October afternoon. The camping host was an ancient man named Virgil, who looked like he'd been carved from the same weathered wood as the surrounding trees. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were clouded with cataracts and he kept sniffing the air like he was testing for something. "You folks picked an interesting time to visit," he said, squinting at our registration. "Most people clear out before October. Gets lean around here." "Lean?" Margie asked. "Hunting season don't start for another month," Virgil said, "but things get hungry before then. Real hungry." He handed us our site map and a photocopied sheet that looked like it had been run off on a machine from the 1980s. The header read, "Campground Safety Guidelines" in faded block letters. "Read this," Virgil said, "all of it, and follow every rule." Margie laughed. "Come on, Virgil. We're not rookies. We know about bears and coyotes." Virgil's clouded eyes fixed on her with surprising intensity. "Ma'am, you don't know nothing about what lives in these woods. Not a damn thing. Our site was number 17, down a narrow gravel road that wound deeper into the forest than seemed necessary. The trees pressed close on both sides, oak and hickory and maple, their October leaves creating a canopy so thick that even in afternoon, it felt like twilight underneath. The site itself was spacious enough with a concrete pad for the RV, a picnic table, and a fire ring. But something felt off about it. The grass was too green in some spots, completely dead in others, forming irregular patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Probably just the old mining operations," I told Margie as we set up. "Soil's all messed up from the strip mining." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The patterns looked deliberate, like symbols written in living and dead vegetation. That evening, we grilled burgers on our portable gas grill and sat around our campfire, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about our plans. Florida in December, Arizona in February, maybe up to Alaska if we were feeling adventurous. "I love this," Margie said, leaning against me. "Just us, the forest, no phones ringing or neighbors complaining about the grass." That's when we heard the first scream. It came from deeper in the woods, high and desperate, lasting for maybe 5 seconds before cutting off abruptly. Not human. At least, I hoped not human, but not like any animal I'd ever heard either. "Bobcat, maybe," I said, though my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Margie shivered and moved closer to the fire. That didn't sound like any cat I've ever heard. We'd been camping for 3 days when we met the Hendersons. Tom and Carol Henderson from Newark, retired school teachers traveling in a small Winnebago that looked older than our marriage. They'd pulled into Site 19 the night before, and Carol came over in the morning to introduce herself. "Isn't this just beautiful?" she said, accepting a cup of coffee from Margie. "We've been coming to Wayne for 15 years, and we've never seen it so active." "Active?" I asked. Carol's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you know, wildlife. There's so much wildlife this year." But Tom, joining us a few minutes later, looked troubled. "Carol, tell them about the sounds." "It's probably nothing," Carol said quickly. "What sounds?" Margie asked. Tom sat heavily in one of our camp chairs. "We've been hearing things at night, scratching sounds on the outside of our RV, and voices." "Voices? Like children," Carol said reluctantly. "Children calling for help. But when we look outside, there's nothing there." Tom nodded. "Last night, someone, or something, tried to open our door, turned the handle real slow like they were trying to be quiet about it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Did you report it to Virgil?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Virgil just handed us that same safety sheet and told us to read it again, like we haven't memorized the damn thing." That afternoon, while Margie napped, I finally took a close look at the safety guidelines Virgil had given us. Most of it was standard campground stuff. Secure food, don't feed wildlife, respect quiet hours. But buried in the middle were some odd rules. Do not respond to calls for help coming from the forest, especially from children. If you hear scratching on your RV at night, do not investigate. Remain inside until dawn. Report any sightings of unusually large wildlife to the camp host immediately. Do not follow strange lights in the forest. If someone claims to be lost and asks for help, verify their identity before opening your door. The last rule chilled me. If a family member goes missing, do not search for them alone. Contact the camp host and wait for assistance. That night, the scratching started. It began around midnight, a slow scraping sound along the side of our RV, like claws or fingernails dragging across the aluminum siding. Margie woke up immediately. "Bobby, what is that?" "Probably just a raccoon," I whispered, though the sound was too loud, too deliberate for any raccoon. The scratching moved along the length of our RV, from the bedroom toward the front. Through the thin walls, we could hear whatever was making it breathing. Deep, raspy breaths that sounded almost like sobbing. Then came the voice. "Help me," it called from right outside our bedroom window. A child's voice, thin and desperate. "Please, I'm lost. I can't find my mommy." Margie sat up. "Bobby, there's a child out there." "No," I said, grabbing her arm. "Remember the safety sheet. We don't respond to calls for help." "But it's a child," the voice came again, closer to the window. "Please, I'm so scared. The bad things are coming. Please let me in." I could see Margie wavering, her maternal instincts warring with the growing fear in her eyes. The scratching had stopped, but we could still hear that labored breathing. "Mommy?" the voice called. "Mommy, is that you in there?" That's when I realized the voice was changing, getting deeper, older. By the end of the sentence, it sounded like a grown man trying to imitate a child. "Mommy, please, I'm so hungry." The breathing got louder, more excited, like whatever was out there could smell our fear. We sat in terrified silence for the next 3 hours until dawn. Only when the first pale light filtered through our blinds did the breathing stop and the presence outside our RV fade away. The next morning, we found the marks. Deep scratches in the aluminum siding, far too high to be made by any normal animal. And in the soft dirt around our RV, footprints. They started out small, child-sized, but gradually got larger as they circled our trailer. By the time they reached our door, they were enormous, easily size 15 with long claw marks extending from the toe impressions. "We should leave," Margie said, staring at the tracks. "The Hendersons said they've been coming here for 15 years, I replied. "If it was really dangerous, they wouldn't keep coming back." But when we went to check on Tom and Carol, their campsite was empty. Their Winnebago was gone, leaving only bare earth and a few scattered pieces of camping gear. We found Virgil at the camp office, sitting behind his desk and staring at nothing. "The Hendersons left early," he said before I could ask. "Family emergency." What kind of emergency?" Virgil's clouded eyes focused on me. "The kind where you get a phone call in the middle of the night telling you to get out. Now." "What's really going on here, Virgil?" The old man sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. "How much do you really want to know?" "Everything. This land," Virgil said. "It ain't natural. Strip mining tore up the earth, broke things that should have stayed buried. When they claimed it, planted new trees and called it a forest, they didn't know what they were inviting back." "What kind of things?" "Hungry things. Old things that remember when this land was different. They've been sleeping in the deep places, in the old mine shafts and caves. But every October, when the food gets scarce and winter's coming, they wake up." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as the ramblings of a superstitious old man, but I remembered those footprints, that changing voice in the darkness. "Why don't you close the campground?" "Can't. Forest Service won't listen. They say it's bears, maybe feral dogs, but they ain't never spent a night out here in October." "Then why do you stay?" Virgil's smile was sad and tired. "Someone's got to warn folks. Someone's got to keep the rules." That afternoon, I tried to convince Margie to leave, but she was stubborn, insisting that we were letting our imaginations run away with us. "It's probably just bears," she said. "Big bears with weird tracks." "Bears don't imitate children's voices." "You don't know what we heard. It was dark. We were scared. Our minds could have been playing tricks." I knew she was wrong, but I also knew that look in her eyes. Margie had made up her mind. Nothing short of actual physical danger would change it. The second night was worse. The scratching started earlier, around 10 p.m., and this time it was accompanied by voices. Multiple voices, all calling for help, all claiming to be lost children. "Bobby," one called in a perfect imitation of our daughter Sarah's voice from when she was 7. "Daddy, I'm scared. Please come find me." Margie gasped. "That's Sarah. That's exactly how Sarah sounded when she had nightmares." "Sarah's 25 and living in Chicago," I said. "That's not her." But the voice continued, cycling through different versions of our daughter at different ages. Sarah at 5, Sarah at 10, Sarah at 16. Each voice perfect, each one more heartbreaking than the last. "Daddy, please, the bad man is chasing me. I'm hiding in the woods, but I can't find the way back." Through our bedroom window, I could see shapes moving in the darkness. Tall, thin figures that seemed to bend in ways that human spines weren't meant to bend. Their eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's, but there was intelligence there. Cruel, patient intelligence. "Margie," I whispered. "Look outside, but don't let them see you." She peered through the blinds and immediately jerked back, her face pale. "Those aren't children," she said. "No, they're not." The creatures circled our RV for hours, calling to us in the voices of everyone we'd ever loved. Our children, our parents, old friends, even each other. When they used my voice to call to Margie, it was so perfect that for a moment I wondered if I was actually speaking. "Margie, honey, come outside. I need to show you something important." "Bobby," Margie said, looking at me in terror. "If that's not you talking, then what is it?" But the thing using my voice just laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass mixed with funeral hymns. Dawn took forever to come. The third day brought new horrors. The patterns in the grass around our RV had changed overnight, forming more complex symbols that seemed to writhe when I looked at them directly. And there were gifts. Small offerings placed carefully around our campsite. A child's stuffed rabbit with its throat torn out. A wedding ring with something that looked like dried blood crusted in the band. A family photo with all the faces scratched away except for 2. A man and woman who looked exactly like Margie and me. "We have to leave," Margie said, and this time there was no argument in her voice. "Now. Today." But when I tried to start the truck, nothing happened. The engine turned over fine, but it wouldn't catch. I checked everything I could think of. Fuel, spark plugs, battery connections. Everything looked normal, but the truck refused to run. "It's them," Virgil said when I walked to the office for help. "They don't want you to leave. You've seen too much, heard too much. You're part of their hunting ground now." "That's insane." "Is it? How many normal explanations you got for what's been happening?" I didn't have an answer for that. "There might be a way," Virgil said reluctantly, "but you ain't gonna like it." "Tell me." "They're hungry. Been hungry for a long time. Most years they take deer, maybe a few feral dogs, but this year's been bad. Drought killed off a lot of the wildlife and they're getting desperate." "What are you saying?" "They need to feed, and they've got their sights set on you and your wife." The cold that went through me had nothing to do with the October air. "You're talking about human sacrifice. I'm talking about survival. Yours and theirs." "No, absolutely not." Virgil shrugged. "Then you better hope your truck starts working, because come nightfall they ain't going to be content just circling your RV." I walked back to our campsite in a daze, my mind reeling. There had to be another way. There had to be. But deep down, I knew Virgil was right. Whatever was hunting us had been patient so far, testing us, playing with us. But that patience was wearing thin. That afternoon, I made a decision that still haunts me. I told Margie I was going for a walk to clear my head. Instead, I went looking for them. I found them in a clearing about a mile from our campsite, a grove of dead trees that formed a perfect circle around a depression in the earth. The depression was filled with bones, animal bones mostly, but some that looked disturbingly human. They were waiting for me. There were 5 of them, tall and impossibly thin, their skin the color of old bark. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for clothing were actually strips of flesh hanging from their bodies like tattered rags. Their faces were wrong, too long and too narrow, with mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. "Robert Johnson," one of them said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "We've been waiting for you. What do you want?" "What we've always wanted. What we need to survive the long winter ahead. I won't let you hurt my wife." The creature that had spoken tilted its head and I heard bones crack. "We aren't asking for both of you." "What?" "One will satisfy us. For now. Choose." The world seemed to tilt around me. "Choose. Your wife is old, stringy, not much meat on those bones. But you're still strong, still healthy. You would feed us better." "I'm not choosing between us." "Then we'll take you both, and the choice will be made for you." They let me return to the campsite, but I could feel them watching from the tree line, waiting. I found Margie packing our belongings, tears streaming down her face. "I heard voices," she said. "Your voice and mine, having a conversation about leaving me behind. But you were standing right here the whole time. They're trying to get in our heads. It's working." That night was our last night. They came just after sunset, all of them, surrounding our RV in a perfect circle. But this time, they didn't just scratch and call. This time, they began to sing. It was a song without words, a harmony of inhuman voices that seemed to vibrate in our bones. And as they sang, the RV began to change. The walls grew soft, pliable, like living tissue. The floor beneath our feet felt warm and wet. Through the windows, we could see the creatures swaying as they sang, their elongated arms raised toward our transformed shelter. "Bobby," Margie whispered, "what's happening to us?" The answer came to me with horrible clarity. They were digesting us. Our RV had become some kind of organic stomach, slowly breaking us down while we were still alive. "We have to get out," I said. But when I tried the door, it wouldn't open. The handle had fused with the frame, becoming part of the same organic mass that our home had transformed into. The walls began to close in. "Bobby!" Margie screamed as the ceiling started to lower. "Do something!" I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the kitchen and smashed it against what had been our window. The glass was gone, replaced by something that felt like skin, but it tore under the repeated impacts. We squeezed through the hole I'd made, falling into the dirt outside. The creatures stopped singing and turned toward us with those terrible, patient smiles. "Running only makes the meat more tender," one of them said. We ran anyway, through through the dark forest, crashing through underbrush, following the faint starlight that filtered through the canopy. Behind us, we could hear them following, not hurrying, just maintaining their steady pace. They knew they'd catch us eventually. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before I realized the horrible truth. We were running in circles. Every landmark, every distinctive tree we'd passed before. "They're hurting us," I gasped to Margie. "Back where?" "To the feeding ground." And sure enough, we stumbled into the clearing with the circle of dead trees, the bone-filled depression at its center gleaming white in the moonlight. The creatures emerged from the forest around us, their songs resuming, their arms reaching toward us with casual certainty. "Choose now," their leader said. "Or we choose for you." I looked at Margie, my wife of 23 years, the mother of my children, the woman I'd promised to love and protect until death do us part. And I made my choice. "Take me," I said. "Bobby, no. Take me and let her go." The creature smiled, showing all those needle teeth. Acceptable. They moved forward and I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But the pain never came. Instead, I heard Margie scream. Not in fear, but in rage. I opened my eyes to see her rushing toward the creatures with a burning branch she'd pulled from somewhere, swinging it like a club. The flames caught one of them across the face and it shrieked, stumbling backward. "Run, Bobby," she shouted. "Run!" The other creatures converged on her, and I did the most cowardly thing I've ever done in my life. I ran. I left my wife in that clearing with those things and ran like the scared, selfish bastard I'd always been deep down. I made it to the main road just as the sun was coming up, flagged down a passing truck, and told a story about getting lost while hiking, about my wife having a heart attack back at the campsite. The search teams found nothing. No RV, no campsite, no bodies. According to the official report, there had never been a reservation for Robert and Margie Johnson at Wayne National Forest. Virgil was gone too. The camp office was boarded up, with a sign saying the camping area was closed for maintenance. I've spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself it was all a breakdown, a psychotic episode brought on by stress and middle-age crisis. But I know the truth. Margie is still out there, somewhere in those woods. And sometimes late at night I can hear her calling to me. Not for help, not in fear. She's hungry now, just like them. And she's calling me back to finish what we started. The choice is still mine to make. But I'm running out of reasons to keep running. I never believed in the stories they told about Zeleleski State Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Amanda Wright. I'm 36 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The Class A Winnebago Vista was my midlife crisis purchase, all 40 feet of it gleaming white and chrome in the driveway of my Columbus suburban home. After my divorce from Derek was finalized and the kids went to live with him full-time, I needed something that was mine, something that represented freedom instead of failure. "You sure about going alone?" my sister Karen asked as I loaded the last of my supplies. "Zeleleski's pretty remote. What if something happens?" "That's exactly why I'm going," I said. "No cell service, no internet, no constant reminders of everything that went wrong. Just me and nature." Karen frowned. "Mom thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. Mom thinks a lot of things, most of them wrong." The truth was, I probably was having a breakdown. The divorce had been brutal. 18 years of marriage ending with Derek's affair and his lawyer painting me as an unstable alcoholic who couldn't be trusted with our teenage kids. The court believed him. Hell, maybe I'd started believing him too. Zeleleski State Forest sprawled across southern Ohio like a green maze. 26,000 acres of reclaimed strip mine land that had been slowly returning to nature for decades. The campground I'd reserved was called Hope Furnace, named after the old iron furnace ruins that dotted the area from the 1800s. It was a Thursday in late September when I pulled through the entrance gates, the autumn air crisp and clean after the oppressive heat of summer. The campground host was a cheerful woman in her 60s named Betty who looked like someone's favorite grandmother. "First time at Zeleleski?" she asked, checking my reservation. "First time camping alone, actually." Betty's smile faltered slightly. Well, you picked a beautiful spot. Site 12 backs right up to the forest. Very private. But honey, if you need anything, and I mean anything, you come straight to me, okay? Is there something I should be worried about? Oh no, nothing like that, Betty said quickly. It's just, well, some folks find the solitude a bit overwhelming, especially at night. The forest can play tricks on your mind if you're not used to it. My site was perfect. A level concrete pad surrounded by towering oak and hickory trees that were just beginning to turn gold and red. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, giving me the isolation I craved. I spent the afternoon setting up camp and exploring the immediate area, following deer trails that wound through the dense undergrowth. The forest felt old in a way that was hard to describe. Not just the age of the trees, but something deeper, like the land itself held memories that went back centuries. I found remnants of the old mining operations, rusted equipment half buried in the earth, foundations of long-abandoned buildings, and everywhere the telltale terraced hills where strip mining had carved away the original landscape. That first evening, I sat outside my RV with a glass of wine, watching the sun set through the canopy and feeling something like peace for the first time in months. The divorce papers in my purse felt less like a death sentence and more like a starting point. That's when I saw the first face. It was just a glimpse, really. A pale oval among the trees about 50 yards away, there one moment and gone the next. Human-shaped, but too far away to make out details. Probably just another camper taking an evening walk, though I hadn't heard anyone approaching. "Hello," I called out. No response. The forest had gone completely quiet, not even the sound of insects or birds. Just an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. I went inside and locked the door, telling myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. The second day started normally enough. I hiked the backpack trail, a challenging 10-mile loop that wound through some of the most remote parts of the forest. The exercise felt good, and the solitude that had seemed ominous the night before now felt liberating. I was about 5 miles in when I found the photographs. They were scattered along the trail like breadcrumbs. Maybe 24 Polaroid pictures, their colors faded and edges curled from weather exposure. Most showed groups of people camping, hiking, posing by RVs and tents. Normal vacation photos, except for one disturbing detail. In every single picture, all the faces had been carefully cut out with a razor blade. I picked up several of the photos, studying them more closely. The clothing and RV models suggested they'd been taken over a span of decades, from the 1980s through what looked like recent years. Families, couples, groups of friends, all rendered anonymous by those precise circular cuts. At the bottom of the pile was a photo that made my blood run cold. It showed my RV, my campsite, taken from the tree line, and standing beside my picnic table was a figure in jeans and a red flannel shirt. Me, from yesterday evening, but where my face should have been was another circular hole. I gathered up all the photos and hiked back to my campsite as fast as I could, constantly checking over my shoulder. The forest seemed different now, the shadows deeper and more threatening. Every rustling leaf sounded like footsteps. Back at camp, I spread the photos across my dinette table and tried to make sense of them. The picture of me was definitely recent. I recognized the shirt, the way I'd been standing. But who had taken it? And why remove the faces? That's when I noticed something else. In the background of several photos, barely visible among the trees, were pale shapes that looked almost like faces, watching from the forest. I tried calling the campground office, but my landline phone in the RV wasn't working. The silence on the line wasn't the familiar dead air of a disconnection. It was something else, like the sound was being absorbed before it could reach its destination. That evening, I stayed inside with all the lights on, periodically checking the windows. Around 9 p.m., I saw them. Faces in the windows. Not pressed against the glass, but somehow inside the reflection itself, staring back at me with hollow, empty eye sockets. Men, women, children. Dozens of them, layer upon layer like a photograph double exposed too many times. I stumbled backward, knocking over my coffee mug. When I looked again, the windows showed only my own reflection, pale and terrified. But as I watched, my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. The reflection raised its hand and waved at me, its mouth moving in words I couldn't hear. Behind it, more faces began to appear. The missing faces from the photographs, I realized with growing horror. They crowded behind my reflection like spectators at a window, all of them watching me with those hollow, cut-out eyes. I grabbed a towel and covered the window, then went through the RV covering every reflective surface I could find. Mirrors, the microwave door, even the chrome fixtures in the bathroom. But I could still feel them watching. The third night, they came outside. I woke around midnight to the sound of whispers. Not voices exactly, but something like voices, speaking in a language that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to the fear centers of my brain. Through the small gap in my bedroom curtains, I could see them in the moonlight. Dozens of figures standing among the trees, perfectly still, all facing my RV. They looked like people from a distance, but there was something wrong with their proportions, their posture, the way they held themselves. And they had no faces. Where faces should have been were smooth, blank surfaces that reflected the moonlight like polished stone. But somehow, I could still feel them watching me. One of them began to move, gliding rather than walking toward my RV. As it got closer, I could see that it wore familiar clothes, jeans and a red flannel shirt. My clothes from the photograph. It stopped directly outside my bedroom window and stood there for hours, its blank face somehow expressing more menace than any expression could have. In the morning, I found my footprints in the dirt around my RV, but I hadn't been outside. I tried to leave that morning, but my RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over fine, but the moment I put it in gear, it died. Every time. I checked every connection I could think of, but nothing was obviously wrong. Walking to the campground office, I found it empty. Betty's car was still in the parking lot, her coffee still warm on the desk, but she was nowhere to be found. A handwritten sign on the door said, "Back in 10 minutes," but the ink looked old and faded. I was completely alone. That afternoon, I decided to hike to the main road and flag down help, but every trail I took led me in circles, back to my campsite. The forest had become a maze with no exit, the paths shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. By evening, I was exhausted and terrified. I barricaded myself inside the RV, pushing furniture against the door and windows, but it didn't matter. They were already inside. Not physically inside. The door was still locked, the windows still covered, but inside the reflections, inside every surface that could show an image. I could see them moving behind the covered mirrors, pressing against the towels I'd hung over them, and slowly, my own reflection began to change. At first, it was subtle. My reflection would move a split second after I did, or turn its head when mine was perfectly still. But as the night wore on, the differences became more pronounced. My reflection began to mouth words I wasn't speaking, to make expressions I wasn't making, and behind it, the faceless figures pressed closer, reaching through the reflective surface toward me. I realized what they wanted. They needed faces. Real faces. Living faces. The photographs were trophies, memories of the faces they'd stolen. And somehow, they were using the reflections to take them. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and began smashing every reflective surface in the RV. Mirrors, windows, chrome fixtures. Anything that could show my image. Glass flew everywhere, cutting my hands and face, but I couldn't stop, because with each reflection I destroyed, I could feel them losing their grip on me. The last mirror was in the bathroom, a large medicine cabinet mirror that I'd somehow missed. As I raised the hammer, I saw them all clearly for the first time. Not just the faceless figures, but the faces themselves, floating like ghosts behind the glass. Hundreds of them. Decades of stolen faces, trapped in some reflective purgatory. I saw children who should have grown up, adults who should have grown old, all of them pressing against the barrier between their world and mine, and I saw my own face among them, already half faded, being slowly pulled away from me. I brought the hammer down with all my strength. The mirror exploded in a shower of silver fragments, and with it came a sound like 1,000 voices screaming. The faceless figures scattered, dissolving into shadow and moonlight, their stolen collection finally released. My RV started on the first try. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached Columbus, my hands still bleeding from the broken glass. The official report said I'd had some kind of nervous breakdown, that the stress of my divorce had caused me to hallucinate and destroy my own property. Maybe that's true. Maybe the isolation and guilt and loneliness had finally broken something in my mind, and everything I experienced was just the product of a psyche finally collapsing under the weight of too much loss. But I still can't look in mirrors without checking to make sure my reflection is really mine. And sometimes, late at night, I find photographs slipped under my door. Pictures of me at my new apartment, at work, at the grocery store. Normal pictures, except for one detail. My face has been carefully cut out with a razor blade. They're still collecting, still hunting. And I think they're getting closer to taking what they want. I've stopped looking at my reflection altogether now. I've covered every mirror in my apartment, avoided every window, every polished surface that might show my image. Because I know that somewhere in that forest, in some place between the real world and the world of reflections, the faceless ones are still waiting, and they're not done with me yet. The divorce papers Derek served me contained one final cruelty: custody of our family photos. All those years of birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments, all those captured faces, now belonged to him. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe those faces are safer with him than they would be with me. Because I'm starting to understand the truth about Zeleleski State Forest, about those old mining scars and the things that live in them. The land remembers everything that's taken from it. Iron ore, coal, topsoil, and now faces. All of it stored somewhere deep underground, in chambers carved by machines and tunnels dug by desperate men. The faces are down there, in the dark, waiting for someone to free them. And the faceless ones are their guardians, their collectors, adding to the hoard one stolen reflection at a time. I think about those photographs sometimes, wonder how many other people have found them scattered along forest trails like warnings. Wonder how many others have seen their own image among the collection, already half faded, being slowly pulled away. The smart thing would be to stay away from mirrors, avoid reflective surfaces, never go camping alone again. Live a careful, paranoid life where I can pretend none of it was real. But late at night, when the loneliness gets too heavy to bear, I find myself thinking about going back. Not to Zeleleski, I'm not that far gone yet, but to other forests, other remote places where the shadows are deep and the mirrors show too much. Because the truth is, I miss seeing my reflection smile when I'm not smiling. I miss the feeling of being watched, of mattering enough to be hunted. Derek was right about one thing. I am unstable. But maybe instability is just another word for being open to possibilities that stable people can't see. Maybe the faceless ones weren't trying to steal from me. Maybe they were trying to set me free. The apartment is getting smaller every day, the walls pressing closer, the normal world feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. And somewhere in southern Ohio, in a forest where the earth remembers everything it's lost, something is waiting for me to come back. Something that knows exactly what I look like, because it's been practicing in the mirror. I think it's time to go home. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Thomas Davis. I had just turned 38 when we arrived at Shaunie State Forest, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The Fleetwood Bounder was our family's dream machine, a 35-foot Class A motorhome that we'd saved for 3 years to buy. My wife, Linda, had picked out every detail, from the cherrywood cabinets to the residential refrigerator to the bunk beds where our twins, Kyle and Emma, could sleep during our cross-country adventures. "This is going to be perfect, Dad," Emma said as we pulled through the gates of Shaunie State Forest on a humid August morning. At 11, she was already showing signs of the wanderlust that Linda and I shared. "Just wait until you see the night sky out here," Kyle added, clutching his new telescope. "No light pollution for miles. Linda squeezed my hand from the passenger seat. First family camping trip in the new RV. This is going to be one for the memory books. If she only knew how right she was. Shaunie State Forest sprawled across southern Ohio like a green ocean. 63,000 acres of mixed hardwood forest, deep hollows and winding streams. We'd reserved a spot at Turkey Creek Lake Campground, one of the more remote areas where families could really disconnect from the digital world. The campground host was a grizzled man in his 70s named Earl, who looked like he'd been carved from the same weathered sandstone as the surrounding hills. He studied our registration with the kind of intensity usually reserved for legal documents. Site 23, he said finally. That's way back in the holler, near the old Cherokee burial grounds. Cherokee? Linda asked, her interest piqued. She taught 4th grade and loved sharing historical tidbits with the kids. Earl's eyes went distant. Oh, yeah, this whole area was sacred to them. Burial caves, vision quest sites, places where the spirits were supposed to sleep. Of course, that was before the white settlers came and stirred things up. Stirred things up how? Kyle asked. Boy's got a curious mind, Earl said, but he wasn't smiling. Some things are better left curious about, son. Some things are better left sleeping. He handed us a photocopied map of the campground and a sheet of rules that looked like it had been typed on a manual typewriter sometime in the 1980s. Most of the rules were standard campground fare, but a few stood out. Do not enter any caves or rock shelters without permission from the camp host. Report any unusual dreams or sleep disturbances immediately. Children must be supervised at all times after dark. Do not wake anyone who appears to be sleeping outdoors. If you find carved symbols on trees or rocks, do not touch them or attempt to copy them. The last rule gave me a chill. If family members begin sleepwalking, wake them immediately and report to the camp host. Seems like a lot of rules for a family campground, Linda said. Earl's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Ma'am, some places have more history than others, and some history doesn't stay buried as deep as it should. Our campsite was beautiful, nestled in a grove of ancient oak trees beside a creek that gurgled peacefully over smooth stones. The kids immediately claimed the bunk area and began planning their exploration of the surrounding forest. Can we hike to the lake? Emma asked as we set up camp. After we get everything unpacked, I said, and only on the marked trails. This isn't some city park, Dad, Kyle protested. We can handle a little adventure. The marked trails only, Linda said firmly, at least until we get familiar with the area. That first afternoon passed peacefully. We hiked the nature trail, a well-maintained loop that wound through the forest and around the lake. Linda took pictures of wildflowers while the kids collected interesting rocks and pieces of driftwood. It felt like the perfect start to our family adventure. It wasn't until that evening that things began to feel wrong. We were sitting around our campfire after dinner, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, when Kyle suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. We all listened. At first I heard only the normal sounds of the forest. Insects, a distant owl, the creek bubbling nearby. But then I caught it too, a sound like singing, so faint it might have been the wind, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. "It's beautiful," Emma said dreamily, like a lullaby. The singing seemed to be getting closer, or maybe just clearer. It wasn't in English. The melody was haunting and wordless, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost familiar, like something half-remembered from childhood. "We should go inside," Linda said suddenly. "Why? It's just someone else camping," Kyle protested. But Linda was already standing, her face pale in the firelight. "No, that's not normal singing." As if in response to her words, the singing stopped abruptly. The forest fell silent, not even the buzz of insects breaking the oppressive quiet. "Now, can we go inside?" Linda asked. We spent the rest of the evening in the RV, playing board games and trying to pretend nothing had happened. But I could see Linda checking the windows periodically, and the kids seemed unusually subdued. Around 10 p.m., I stepped outside to secure our campsite for the night. The fire had died to embers, and the darkness beyond our little circle of light seemed deeper than it should have been. As I was putting away our camp chairs, I noticed something odd. Our picnic table had been moved. Not far, maybe 3 feet from where we'd positioned it earlier. But I was certain of the original placement because I'd specifically aligned it with the concrete pad. Now, it sat at an angle as if someone had carefully repositioned it while we were inside. Probably just settled, I told myself, but I knew that was impossible. The table was heavy, and the ground was level and firm. I was checking the RV's exterior lights when I saw them. Footprints in the soft earth around our campsite. Bare feet, adult-sized, forming a perfect circle around our RV. But what made my skin crawl was the depth of the impressions. They were too deep, as if whoever made them was far heavier than any normal person. Or as if they'd been standing in the same spots for a very long time. That night, the dreams began. I found myself walking through a forest that looked like Shawnee but felt older, more primal. The trees were larger, their trunks twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. And everywhere, carved into bark and stone, were symbols that seemed to writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. I wasn't alone in the forest. Other figures moved between the trees. People in modern clothes who walked with their eyes closed, their faces turned upward toward a sky I couldn't see through the canopy. They were all heading in the same direction, following paths that led deeper into the woods. I tried to call out to them, but no sound came from my throat. I tried to turn around, to go back the way I'd come, but my feet wouldn't obey. Like the others, I was being drawn deeper into the forest, toward something that waited in the darkness ahead. The dream felt more real than any dream I'd ever had. I could smell the earth, feel the humidity on my skin, hear the whisper of leaves overhead. And underneath it all was that singing, wordless and hypnotic, calling me forward. I woke to find Linda shaking me gently. "Tom, you were sleepwalking," she said, her voice tight with worry. I was standing in our RV's doorway, my hand on the handle, wearing only my underwear. Through the screen door, I could see the forest bathed in moonlight, looking exactly as it had in my dream. "You were trying to go outside," Linda continued. "I woke up, and you were just standing there, reaching for the door. I was dreaming," I said. But even as I said it, I could feel the pull of the forest, a subtle compulsion to step outside and follow the paths that led deeper into the woods. About what? I told her about the dream, about the walking figures and the ancient symbols. As I spoke, I could see her face growing paler. "Tom, the kids are gone." For a moment, her words didn't register. Then I spun around to look at their bunk area. Both beds were empty, the blankets thrown aside. "Kyle, Emma," I called out, but there was no response from anywhere in the RV. We threw on clothes and grabbed flashlights, searching our immediate campsite first. No sign of them. Their shoes were still by the door, which meant they'd gone out barefoot. "We have to call for help," Linda said, reaching for her cell phone. No service. Of course, there was no service this deep in the forest. We followed the beam of our flashlights into the woods, calling their names. After 20 minutes of frantic searching, we found them. They were standing in a small clearing about a quarter-mile from our campsite, their backs to us, perfectly still. Between them and several other figures. Adults I didn't recognize, also motionless. "Kyle! Emma!" Linda called out. None of them moved. None of them even acknowledged our presence. I approached Kyle slowly, my flashlight beam playing across his face. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. His mouth was slightly open and I could hear him breathing in rhythm with the others. "Kyle, can you hear me?" No response. I waved my hand in front of his face, but he didn't blink, didn't react at all. "They're sleepwalking," Linda whispered. All of them. I counted 7 figures in total. Our kids, 3 adults I'd never seen before, and 2 other children. All standing in a perfect circle, all facing outward, all completely unresponsive. "Should we wake them?" Linda asked. I remembered the campground rules. If family members begin sleepwalking, wake them immediately. But there was something about the scene that made me hesitate. The way they all stood in perfect formation, the synchronized breathing, the sense that we were interrupting something important. "Kyle, I said loudly, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him. His eyes snapped into focus and he looked around in confusion. "Dad? How did we get here?" Emma woke next, then the other children. But the adults remained motionless, still trapped in whatever trance had claimed them. "I was dreaming," Emma said as we led them back to our campsite. There was singing, and a lady in white telling us to come and see something wonderful. "What kind of something?" Linda asked. "A place where people go to sleep forever and have the most beautiful dreams." Kyle nodded. "She said we could stay there if we wanted, just lie down and never have to worry about anything ever again." Back at our RV, we tried to process what had happened. The kids seemed normal now, fully awake and aware, but they both spoke of the same dream figure, a woman in white who'd called to them from the forest. "We should leave," Linda said. "First thing in the morning." "Agreed," I said. But even as I spoke, I could feel that pull again, that subtle urging to step outside and follow the paths deeper into the woods. We locked the RV doors and took turns keeping watch, but it didn't matter. Around 3 a.m., the singing started again. This time, it was coming from inside our RV. Linda was humming softly, her eyes closed, her face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. The kids were humming too, all of them in perfect harmony, creating that same wordless melody we'd heard from the forest. And I realized I was humming along. The melody was beautiful, hypnotic, speaking to something deep in my subconscious that craved rest, craved peace, craved an end to all the worries and responsibilities of modern life. It promised dreams without awakening, sleep without morning, peace without end. I forced myself to stop humming, biting my tongue until the pain broke through the trance. Then I shook Linda awake. "The singing," I said. We were all singing. Linda blinked in confusion, then looked at the kids who were still humming with their eyes closed. "Wake them up," she said. But when we tried, they wouldn't wake. Their eyes remained closed, their humming continued, and nothing we did could break them out of their trance. That's when we heard footsteps outside. Through the windows, I could see them. Dozens of figures walking slowly around our RV, men, women, children, all with their eyes closed, all humming that same haunting melody. Some wore modern clothes, others looked like they'd been dressed decades ago. All of them moved with the same measured pace, the same peaceful expression. "They're sleepwalking," Linda whispered. All of them. I recognized some of the faces from missing person posters I'd seen at gas stations and rest stops over the years. Hikers who'd never returned from weekend trips, families who'd vanished while camping, children who'd wandered away from scout camps. They weren't missing anymore. They were here, trapped in some kind of eternal sleepwalk, adding their voices to the chorus that called to others. "We have to get out of here," I said. But when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, as if something was preventing it from running. Outside, the sleepwalkers had formed concentric circles around our RV, all of them humming, all of them calling to us with their wordless song. And I could feel myself responding. The melody was seeping into my brain, promising rest, promising peace, promising an end to all the struggles of consciousness. Linda was succumbing too. Her eyes were growing heavy, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the humming outside. "Fight it," I told her. "Don't listen to them." But it was too late. She was already humming again, her eyes closing, her face taking on that same peaceful expression as the figures outside. I was alone. The kids were still humming in their bunks, Linda was humming beside me, and outside dozens of voices joined the chorus. The sound was overwhelming, beautiful, irresistible, and I wanted nothing more than to add my voice to theirs. I understood now what Earl had meant about things that should stay sleeping. This place was a trap, a supernatural snare that used the ancient power of the Cherokee burial grounds to call people into eternal rest. The sleepwalkers weren't victims. They were bait, their voices adding to the song that drew others into the woods. But I also understood something else. The Cherokee had known about this place, had marked it as sacred for a reason. They'd understood the danger and had created barriers, safeguards, ways to keep the sleeping power contained. The symbols I'd seen in my dreams weren't just decorative. They were warnings, protections. And if I could find them, maybe I could break the spell. I fought against the pull of the humming, forcing myself to move, to think, to act. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled out of the RV, past the circles of sleepwalkers who didn't seem to notice my presence. I followed my dream memories deeper into the forest, looking for the trees and stones where the symbols were carved. The humming followed me, growing louder as more voices joined the chorus, but I kept moving. I found them in a small grove near the center of the forest. Ancient oak trees with symbols carved deep into their bark, standing stones with markings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. And I understood. The symbols weren't just warnings. They were instructions. A ritual that could break the spell, wake the sleepers, send them back to the world of the living. But it required a sacrifice. Someone had to stay behind, to take their place, to become the guardian of the sleeping power. I thought of Linda and the kids, trapped in their humming trance, slowly being drawn into permanent sleep. I thought of all the other families who'd disappeared over the years, all the missing persons who'd found their way here and never left. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I began the ritual, following the instructions carved in ancient stone, speaking words in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. The humming grew louder, more insistent, as if the sleeping power sensed what I was trying to do. But gradually, the voices began to fade. One by one, the sleepwalkers stopped humming, opened their eyes, looked around in confusion. I saw them stumbling back toward the campground, back toward their families, back toward the world of the waking. Linda and the kids would be among them, I knew. They would wake up in our RV with no memory of what had happened, wondering why I wasn't there. They would wait for me for a while, then they would go home without me. One more missing person, one more unsolved disappearance. But they would be alive. They would be free. And I would be here, in the heart of Shaunie State Forest, standing guard over something that should never wake. My voice would join the ancient chorus, calling to those who wandered too deep into the woods, warning them away or drawing them in, depending on what the forest needed. It's not so bad, being a sleepwalker. The dreams are beautiful, and the peace is real. Sometimes I see other campers through the trees, families like we used to be, and I add my voice to the song that calls to them. Most of them are strong enough to resist. They pack up their camps and leave, never knowing how close they came to joining us. But some hear the beauty in our song. Some understand the peace we offer, and they stay, adding their voices to ours, helping to guard the ancient power that sleeps beneath the hills. Linda and the kids made it home safely. I've seen them in my dreams, living their lives, growing older, moving on. They think I'm dead, and maybe I am. Or maybe I'm more alive than I've ever been, part of something larger and older than human understanding. The Cherokee knew the truth about this place. Some powers are too dangerous to destroy, too ancient to ignore. They can only be contained, guarded, kept sleeping by those willing to sacrifice their waking lives. I'm one of those guardians now, and when the next family drives down that gravel road, looking for adventure and escape, I'll be waiting in the trees, humming softly, calling gently, offering the peace that only sleep can bring. Come and see, my voice whispers with the others. Come and see how beautiful it is to sleep forever. Most people are smart enough to leave, but some, tired of the weight of consciousness, tired of the burden of being awake, hear the beauty in our offer, and they stay. I never believed in the stories they told about Moheakin State Park until what happened to me out there. My name is Daniel Lopez, I'm 29 years old, and what I lived through during that week still wakes me up at night. The 2020 Thor Ace was my pride and joy, a 29-foot Class C motorhome that represented 3 years of saving every penny from my job as a video game developer in Cleveland. My girlfriend Emma had broken up with me 6 months earlier, claiming I was too obsessed with work and not present enough in real life. The RV was supposed to prove her wrong. My commitment to experiencing the world beyond computer screens. "You sure you want to go alone?" my buddy Jake asked as I loaded my camera gear and hiking equipment. Moheakin's got some weird reputation with the locals. Weird how? People going in and coming out different, like they forgot how to be themselves. I laughed it off. Jake was always sharing conspiracy theories and urban legends he'd picked up from gaming forums. Besides, I needed the solitude. My latest project, a virtual reality game called Memory Palace, was consuming every waking thought, and my creativity had hit a wall. Moheakin State Park sprawled across north-central Ohio like a living museum. 1,110 acres of old-growth hemlock forest, deep gorges, and clear streams that had somehow survived the industrial devastation that scarred much of the state. The campground I'd reserved was called Pleasant Hill Lake, tucked into a valley where morning mist clung to the water like forgotten dreams. The campground host was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Margaret, who studied my registration with the intensity of a forensic analyst. "First time at Moheakin?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm a game developer. I design virtual environments. I'm hoping the natural setting will inspire some new ideas." Margaret's expression grew troubled. "Game developer? So you work with memories? Digital recreation of experiences? In a way, yeah. We create immersive environments that feel real to players, places they can explore and remember." She handed me a campground map and a sheet of rules that looked freshly printed, unlike the weathered documents I'd seen at other parks. "Read these carefully. All of them. And whatever you do, don't go hiking alone after dark." The rules were standard except for a few that stood out. Do not photograph or film areas marked with yellow warning signs. Report any incidents of memory loss or disorientation immediately. Do not follow or interact with individuals who cannot remember their own names. If you find personal belongings that seem familiar but you know aren't yours, turn them in to the camp host immediately. Campers experiencing vivid dreams of other people's lives should report to the camp office for evaluation. The last rule was the most specific. Anyone working in memory-related fields, psychology, neuroscience, digital media, must register with the camp host and receive additional safety briefing. "Memory-related fields?" I asked. Margaret sighed. "Son, what you do for a living, creating artificial experiences, manipulating digital memories, it makes you particularly vulnerable to what we deal with here." "Vulnerable to what?" "Memory displacement, identity confusion, the phenomenon where people lose track of which experiences are their own and which belong to someone else." She studied me for a moment. "The forest here, it's old, really old. And sometimes old places remember things that happened in them. Sometimes those memories get confused with the memories of people who visit. I wanted to dismiss it as local folklore, but something in Margaret's tone suggested she was dead serious. "How does that relate to my work?" "Your brain is trained to accept artificial experiences as real, isn't it? To blur the line between actual memory and simulated experience. That makes you an ideal target for collection." My campsite was beautiful, tucked into a grove of ancient hemlocks beside a creek that whispered constantly in a language that sounded almost like conversation. I spent the afternoon setting up and exploring the immediate area, taking photos and video clips for potential game inspiration. The forest felt different from other places I'd camped. Older, more layered, as if every tree and stone held stories that went back centuries. Perfect inspiration for the kind of deep, mysterious environments that made players want to explore for hours. That first evening, I sat outside editing the day's footage on my laptop, wearing headphones to catch the subtle audio details I'd recorded. That's when I noticed something odd in the recordings. Voices. Not clear conversations, but whispered fragments that seemed to come from the forest itself. Words in languages I didn't recognize, mixed with snatches of English that sounded like they were from different time periods. "The harvest was poor this year. Took the children in the night. Remember when the soldiers came? My name was... I can't remember my name." I pulled off my headphones and listened to the actual forest around me. Nothing but wind through branches and the creek's constant murmur. But when I put the headphones back on, the voices returned, layered into the background of my recordings. I chalked it up to electromagnetic interference or some quirk of the old-growth forest's acoustics, but the fragments were so clear, so distinct, that I found myself taking notes, documenting the voices like dialogue for a potential game narrative. That night, my dreams were vivid and strange. I was hiking through Moheakin's trails, but the forest was different. Younger in some places, older in others, as if I was seeing it across different time periods simultaneously. I met other hikers on the trails, a Native American hunter tracking deer, a 19th century naturalist collecting specimens, a family from the 1950s on vacation, modern-day hikers with GPS units and high-tech gear. All of them looked lost. Not geographically lost, but existentially lost, as if they couldn't remember who they were or how they'd gotten there. When I tried to talk to them, they would look at me with desperate confusion and ask, "Do you know my name? Do you remember who I am?" I woke feeling disoriented, as if the dream had been more real than my actual memories of the previous day. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I was in an RV or what I did for a living. The confusion lasted only a few seconds, but it was unsettling enough to make me check my driver's license to confirm my own identity. The second day, I decided to hike the Bridle Trail, a challenging loop that wound through the park's deepest forest areas. I brought my camera gear, hoping to capture some footage of the ancient hemlocks that could serve as inspiration for the mystical forest levels in my game. About 2 miles in, I encountered something that changed everything. A yellow warning sign attached to a tree, exactly like Margaret had mentioned. But instead of warning about dangerous terrain or wildlife, it simply read, "Memory Collection Area. Authorized personnel only." Beyond the sign, barely visible through the undergrowth, was what looked like a small research station. Solar panels, scientific equipment, and several people in white lab coats moving between instrument arrays. My curiosity overcame Margaret's warnings. I approached the perimeter, staying hidden behind trees, and used my camera's zoom lens to get a better look at what they were doing. The researchers were interviewing hikers, or rather, people who looked like hikers but were sitting in folding chairs with blank expressions, staring into space while the scientists asked them questions and recorded their responses. "What's your name?" I heard one researcher ask through my directional microphone. I don't remember," the subject replied. "I remember someone else's name. Someone called Jennifer? Sarah? But that's not me, is it? Tell me about your childhood. I grew up on a farm. No, wait, I grew up in the city. My father was a blacksmith. No, he was an accountant. I remember both, but they can't both be true." The researcher made notes on a tablet. Excellent collection quality. The subject is retaining multiple memory streams with minimal degradation. Collection quality? I whispered to myself. The Moheakin site continues to produce superior results, another scientist said. The old-growth forest seems to function as a natural memory storage medium. Centuries of human experiences embedded in the ecosystem, and the extraction process. Seamless. Subjects experience the forest's stored memories as their own, while their original memories are absorbed into the ecosystem for preservation. I understood with growing horror that I was witnessing some kind of memory harvesting operation. These people were deliberately using the forest's weird properties to steal people's identities and replace them with borrowed memories from the past. I tried to back away quietly, but stepped on a branch that snapped like a gunshot. All the researchers looked in my direction. "We have an observer," one of them called out. "Initiating containment protocol." I ran. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing. Not just the researchers, but something else. The forest itself seemed to be moving. Branches reaching for me. Roots trying to trip me. The very air growing thick with whispered voices trying to confuse my thoughts. I made it back to my RV in record time, packed up my campsite with shaking hands, and drove to the camp office. But when I tried to tell Margaret what I'd seen, she looked at me with genuine confusion. "Research station." "Son, there's no research station in the park. and I don't know any scientists named Jennifer or Sarah. Tida, I have it on video, I said, pulling up the footage on my camera. The LCD screen showed only normal forest scenes. No research station, no scientists, no memory collection operation. Just trees and empty trails. But I saw them. I heard them talking about memory extraction. Margaret's expression grew concerned. Daniel, I think you need to sit down. You're showing signs of memory displacement. Memory displacement? When the forest's stored memories start bleeding into your consciousness, making you think you've experienced things that happened to other people decades or centuries ago, she led me into the camp office and had me sit in a comfortable chair while she made tea. The scientific explanation, she said, settling across from me, is that old-growth forests like Moheakin create unique electromagnetic fields. Something about the mineral content in the soil. The way the trees have grown together over centuries. These fields can interfere with human neural activity, causing memory confusion. And the unscientific explanation. The forest remembers. Every person who's ever walked these trails, every experience that's ever happened here, gets somehow absorbed into the ecosystem. And sometimes, when conditions are right, those stored memories leak out and attach themselves to new visitors. I sipped the tea, feeling slightly more grounded. Is that what's happening to me? Probably. Your work with virtual reality and digital memories makes you especially susceptible. Your brain is already trained to accept artificial experiences as real. So I imagined the research station. More likely, you experienced someone else's memory of encountering authority figures in the forest. Maybe a hiker from the 1960s who stumbled across a military training exercise, or someone from the 1800s who met government surveyors. It made a certain kind of sense, but it didn't explain the vivid details I'd observed, the specific conversations I'd recorded. The voices on my recordings are probably real. The forest does seem to retain acoustic impressions of past events. Some visitors hear Native American conversations from centuries ago. Others pick up fragments of Civil War-era discussions. Your equipment is just sensitive enough to capture what's already there. I spent the rest of the day at the camp office talking with Margaret about the park's history. Moheakin had indeed been inhabited continuously for thousands of years, first by Native American tribes, then by European settlers, then by various research and military groups during the 20th century. The memory displacement effects have been documented since the 1940s, Margaret explained. Usually, it's minor. Hikers getting confused about which trail they took, campers forgetting their own names for a few minutes. But people in certain professions seem to be more susceptible. What professions? Therapists, neurologists, computer programmers, writers, actors, anyone whose work involves manipulating memory or creating alternate realities. Has anyone ever been permanently affected? Margaret's expression grew sad. A few, we call them the lost ones. People who've absorbed so many foreign memories that they can't remember who they originally were. They usually end up staying in the area, unable to return to lives they can no longer remember living. That evening, against Margaret's advice, I decided to stay one more night. I needed to understand what was happening to me, to document the phenomenon properly. If there really was something unique about Moheakin's effect on memory, it could revolutionize my understanding of consciousness and identity. I set up multiple recording devices around my campsite and prepared to monitor my own mental state throughout the night. If I was going to experience memory displacement, I wanted to capture the process as it happened. The voices started around midnight. Not just whispered fragments this time, but clear conversations that seemed to be taking place right outside my RV. I could hear families discussing their camping trips, scientists debating research protocols, soldiers planning maneuvers. But when I looked outside, the campground was empty. I put on my headphones and listened to the live audio feeds from my recording equipment. The conversations were coming through clearly, layer upon layer of human activity spanning decades or centuries. And slowly, I began to recognize some of the voices. My own voice, having conversations I'd never had with people I'd never met. The memory collection process is fascinating, I heard myself saying to someone. We're essentially creating a living database of human experience. Your work with virtual reality gives you unique insights. Another voice replied, Margaret's voice, but younger somehow. You understand how artificial memories can feel completely real. The subjects don't suffer, my voice continued. They simply forget their original lives and remember new ones. It's a form of immortality, really. Their experiences become part of the forest's eternal memory. I pulled off the headphones, my hands shaking. Those weren't my memories, but they felt real. I could remember having that conversation, remember working on memory collection research, remember believing that stealing people's identities was somehow beneficial. That's when I understood the true horror of what was happening. The memory displacement wasn't random. It was deliberate. Something in the forest, whether natural phenomenon or deliberate technology, was indeed harvesting human memories and experiences. But it wasn't just storing them passively. It was using them to recruit new participants in the collection process. I was being programmed to believe I was part of the research team. I packed up my equipment and tried to leave immediately, but my RV wouldn't start. The engine turned over fine, but died the moment I put it in gear, just like every other story I'd heard about supernatural traps that wouldn't let their victims escape. That's when I noticed them. People walking through the campground in the moonlight. Dozens of them from different time periods, all moving with the same purposeful stride toward the forest. Some wore modern hiking gear, others dressed like 19th century settlers. A few in what looked like military uniforms from various eras. All of them had the same blank expression I'd seen on the subjects at the research station. And they were all walking toward my RV. Daniel Lopez, they said in unison, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to come from the forest itself. You have been selected for memory integration. Please report to Collection Area 7 for processing. I'm not part of your experiment, I said, backing toward my RV's door. You are now, they replied. Your memories of game development and virtual reality design are valuable additions to our database. Your identity will be preserved in the forest's eternal memory. What happens to me? You will remember being Dr. Daniel Petrov, a memory researcher who came to Moheakin in 1987 to study the forest's unique properties. You will be happy in this identity. Dr. Petrov had a fulfilling career and meaningful relationships. They were offering me someone else's life, someone else's happiness, someone else's identity. And the terrifying thing was, part of me wanted to accept. Dr. Petrov's memories were already bleeding into my consciousness, and they felt warm, comfortable, complete in a way my actual life never had. Your original identity was marked by isolation and professional obsession, the collective continued. Dr. Petrov's memories contain love, satisfaction, scientific achievement. Which life would you prefer to live? I found myself considering the offer seriously. My real life was indeed lonely and obsessive. Emma had been right about my inability to be present in the real world. Maybe living as Dr. Petrov would be an improvement. But then I remembered something Emma had said during our breakup. You're not really living, Daniel. You're just playing character in your own life. She was right, and accepting Dr. Petrov's identity would be the ultimate expression of that tendency. Abandoning my real self for a more appealing fictional character. No, I said firmly. I choose my own memories, my own mistakes, my own loneliness. The collective looked confused, as if this response was outside their programming. Your original identity contains significant psychological pain, they said. Why would you choose suffering over happiness? Because it's mine. The pain, the mistakes, the isolation, they're all part of who I am. Take them away, and I stop being me. I climbed into my RV and tried the engine again. This time it started and stayed running. As I drove away from Moheakin State Park, I could see the collective in my rearview mirror, standing motionless in the moonlight as if they couldn't understand what had just happened. The drive back to Cleveland was surreal. With each mile I put between myself and the forest, my own memories became clearer, while Dr. Petrov's began to fade. By the time I reached the city, I could barely remember what it had felt like to live someone else's life. But I remembered the lesson. I called Emma the next morning and told her everything. About the RV trip, about the memory displacement, about my realization that I'd been living like a character in someone else's story. I want to try again, I said, but as myself this time, not as some idealized version, not as someone I think you want me to be. Just as me, with all my obsessions and flaws and weird interests. She was quiet for a long moment. That's all I ever wanted, Daniel. For you to be present as yourself, not as some character you were playing. We're taking it slow, but we're trying again. I'm still a game developer, still obsessed with virtual worlds and digital experiences. But now I understand the difference between creating artificial realities and living in them. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working on Memory Palace, I can still hear the whispered voices from Moheakin's forest. Not trying to replace my memories this time, but reminding me that the most precious thing any of us possesses is our own authentic experience. Even when that experience is imperfect, lonely, or marked by failure. Because in the end, being yourself, really yourself, is the only identity worth preserving. The forest can keep its borrowed memories and stolen identities. I'll stick with my own messy, complicated, entirely genuine life. Even if it means sometimes eating dinner alone while coding until 3 a.m., dreaming of virtual worlds that feel more real than my own existence. At least, they're my dreams. We should have never gone to East Fork State Park. I'm Dr. Catherine Morgan. I was 52 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The Tiffin Allegro Red was my retirement gift to myself. A sleek 33-foot Class A motorhome that represented 15 years of saving and dreaming. After decades as an emergency room physician in Cincinnati, I'd finally burned out completely. The endless stream of trauma, the 18-hour shifts, the constant dance with death. It had all caught up with me. You need to get away from medicine completely. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, had advised, no medical journals, no medical shows, no thinking about patients. Just focus on healing yourself. My daughter Sarah thought I was having a breakdown when I bought the RV and announced my plans to spend 6 months camping across the country. "Mom, you've never even been camping," she said as I loaded my new outdoor gear. "And you're talking about living in that thing for half a year?" "That's exactly why I need to do it," I replied. "I've spent 30 years saving other people's lives. Maybe it's time I figured out how to live my own." East Fork State Park, about 40 minutes east of Cincinnati, seemed like the perfect place to start. Close enough to home if I changed my mind, remote enough to really disconnect from my old life. The 4,800-acre park wrapped around East Fork Lake like a green embrace, offering hiking trails, fishing, and the kind of solitude I'd never experienced. The campground host was a soft-spoken man named Gerald, who looked to be in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that shook slightly as he filled out my paperwork. "Dr. Morgan," he said, reading my registration. "Medical doctor?" "Emergency medicine." Though I'm taking a break from all that, Gerald's pen paused over the form. "Might want to keep that to yourself while you're here. Folks around these parts, well, sometimes they need help they can't get anywhere else." "What do you mean?" "Nothing official, of course. Just that sometimes campers have incidents. And the nearest hospital is 40 minutes away. Emergency services take even longer to get back here." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. The same feeling I got when a particularly complex trauma case came through the ER doors. "What kind of incidents?" Gerald's smile was tired. "The kind that happen when people go places they shouldn't go, see things they shouldn't see. East Fork's got a long history, Doc. Not all of it pleasant." He handed me a campground map and a photocopied sheet of guidelines that looked like it had been typed on an old computer. Most were standard park rules, but a few caught my attention. Do not approach anyone exhibiting signs of severe psychological distress without notifying the camp host. Report any injuries that do not respond to normal first aid immediately. Do not enter the restricted area near the old farmstead ruins. If you encounter anyone claiming to be lost in time, contact the camp host and do not attempt to provide assistance. The last rule was the most puzzling. Any campers with medical training are requested to register their qualifications with the camp host for emergency purposes. Emergency purposes? I asked. Gerald's hands shook a little more as he took back the pen. Like I said, Doc, sometimes people need help they can't get anywhere else. My campsite was number 37, tucked into a grove of mature oaks near the lake's edge. The September afternoon was warm, with that particular quality of light that made everything look like a vintage photograph. I spent several hours setting up camp and familiarizing myself with the RV's systems, feeling proud of my newfound self-sufficiency. As evening approached, I sat outside with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and red. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. That's when I saw her. A woman emerged from the tree line about 50 yards away, walking unsteadily toward the lake. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong. Her gait was odd, shambling, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if something was pursuing her. My medical training kicked in automatically. I set down my wine and walked toward her, calling out a greeting. She turned at the sound of my voice, and I stopped dead. Half of her face was missing. Not injured, not burned or torn. Missing, as if someone had carefully erased everything from her left temple to her jawline. Where her left eye should have been was empty space. Not a socket, not scar tissue, just nothing. The absence was so complete it hurt to look at directly. "Help me," she said in a voice that seemed to come from far away. I can't find my way back. Every instinct I had as a physician told me to help her, but something deeper, some primal survival mechanism, screamed at me to run. The woman's remaining eye was fixed on mine with desperate intensity, and I could see that she was trying to tell me something important. "Where are you hurt?" I asked, approaching slowly. "What happened to you?" "I went to see the old farmstead," she said. "I wanted to take pictures, but something was wrong with the shadows there. They moved when I wasn't looking, and when I tried to leave," she gestured to her face, or what was left of it. "The shadows took pieces of me. They're still taking pieces. I can feel myself disappearing." As she spoke, I could see what she meant. The edges of the missing area seemed to be slowly expanding, like watching a photograph dissolve in acid. Whatever was happening to her was continuing, progressing, eating away at her existence one pixel at a time. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, reaching for my phone. "No signal," she said. "There's never any signal near the farmstead. That's part of what keeps people trapped there." "Then we'll drive out of here. My RV—" "I can't leave," she interrupted. "Every time I try to go too far from the farmstead, I start to fade faster. It's like I'm tethered to that place now." I studied her with my physician's eye, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Hallucination brought on by stress? Some kind of optical illusion created by the evening light? But my training had taught me to trust my observations, and what I was observing was impossible. "What's your name?" I asked. Jennifer Walsh. "I'm from Columbus. I came here 3 days ago to do some nature photography." She laughed bitterly. "I was supposed to check out this morning, but—" "Jennifer, I'm Dr. Catherine Morgan. I'm going to help you, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened at the farmstead." Over the next hour, as darkness fell around us, Jennifer told me her story. She'd been exploring the restricted area near the old farmstead ruins, looking for interesting shots of decaying buildings and overgrown foundations. The light had been perfect, golden hour filtering through the trees, creating dramatic shadows. But the shadows had been wrong. They moved independently, she explained, like they were cast by people who weren't there, and they were reaching for me, stretching across the ground like fingers. She'd tried to leave when she noticed the anomaly, but found herself disoriented, unable to find the trail back to the main campground. The shadows had grown bolder, more aggressive, until one had simply touched her. "It didn't hurt," she said. "It was just cold, like ice water flowing over my skin. And then I looked in my camera's LCD screen and saw that part of my face was gone. I tried calling for help on my RV's landline, but got only static. Even my satellite emergency beacon seemed to be malfunctioning. Whatever was affecting Jennifer appeared to be creating some kind of electromagnetic interference. Gerald mentioned that people sometimes need medical help that they can't get anywhere else, I said. I think you're what he was talking about. Jennifer's remaining eye widened. You've met someone else like me? No, but I get the feeling you're not the first person this has happened to. We walked back to the camp office, Jennifer leaning heavily on my arm. With each step away from the lake, she seemed to become more translucent, as if distance from the farmstead area was causing her to fade faster. Gerald was waiting for us on the office porch, his face grim. Another photographer, he said, not really a question. You've seen this before, I said, every few months. Sometimes hikers, sometimes photographers, sometimes just curious campers who wander into the restricted area. They come back, diminished, and it gets worse with time. What exactly is happening to her? Gerald gestured for us to sit on the porch chairs. Near as anyone can figure, there's something wrong with that old farmstead. Has been for almost 70 years. Story goes that during the 1950s, a family named Blackwood lived back there. Real, isolated folks, kept to themselves. Then one day, all 5 of them just vanished. Vanished how? That's the thing. They didn't leave the property. Their bodies were found right where they'd been working, in the garden, by the well, sitting on the front porch. But they were incomplete. Like someone had taken an eraser to parts of them. Jennifer made a soft sound of distress. The authorities couldn't explain it, Gerald continued. Wrote it off as some kind of animal attack, though no animal they knew of could do that kind of damage. But the locals knew better. They'd been seeing strange things around the Blackwood place for months. Shadows that moved wrong, photographs that came out distorted, people getting lost for hours in broad daylight. And it's still happening. Gets worse every year. The state made it a restricted area back in the 70s, but that doesn't stop curious folks from wandering in. Most come out fine, just spooked. But some, he looked at Jennifer with sympathy, some bring a piece of it back with them. There has to be a medical explanation, I said. Some kind of environmental toxin, maybe. Industrial contamination. Radiation exposure. Doc, I've been here for 20 years. I've seen 17 people come out of those woods with parts of themselves missing. And I mean missing. Not damaged or destroyed. Gone, like they never existed in the first place. I spent the night in my RV with Jennifer, monitoring her condition and trying to come up with some kind of treatment plan. But how do you treat something that defied every principle of medicine and biology? By morning, the missing area had expanded to cover most of the left side of her head. She was having trouble speaking, as if the parts of her brain that controlled language were being selectively erased. I can feel my memories going, she whispered. Things I used to know, people I used to love. They're just empty spaces now. I tried every medical intervention I could think of. Intravenous fluids, antibiotics, even experimental treatments for degenerative brain diseases. Nothing had any effect. Whatever was happening to Jennifer was beyond the reach of conventional medicine. That afternoon, Gerald brought me to meet someone he called the Others. Hidden in a secluded area of the campground was a small community of RVs and tents, occupied by people who all shared Jennifer's condition to varying degrees. Some were missing limbs, others had gaps in their torsos. A few had portions of their faces erased like Jennifer. We call it the sanctuary, Gerald explained. People who can't leave because of their connection to the farmstead, but need somewhere safe to exist. I met a man named Robert who'd lost his left arm 3 years ago, a woman named Susan whose legs simply ended at the knees, and an elderly man called Frank who was missing everything from his waist down but somehow remained mobile. We've learned to adapt, Susan told me. The missing parts don't hurt because they're not injured. They're just not there anymore. Never were, as far as our bodies are concerned. But you can't leave the park. The farther we get from the farmstead, the faster we fade, Robert explained. It's like we're being sustained by whatever force exists there. Leave the area entirely and we disappear completely. Has anyone ever tried to investigate the farmstead directly? To find the source of whatever's causing this? The group exchanged uneasy glances. A few have tried, Frank said. None of them came back. At least, not enough of them to tell us what they found. That evening, I made a decision that I knew was probably suicidal, but felt necessary as both a physician and a human being. I was going to the farmstead. Gerald tried to talk me out of it, warning me about the dozens of people who'd been lost to the shadows over the years. The sanctuary residents begged me not to risk it, explaining that they needed someone with medical training to help care for new arrivals. But I couldn't stand by and watch Jennifer continue to fade away. Couldn't accept that there was no solution to a problem that clearly had a source. If I don't come back, make sure Jennifer is comfortable, I told Gerald, and contact my daughter Sarah. Tell her I was trying to help someone. The farmstead was 3 miles into the restricted area, accessible only by an overgrown trail that seemed to resist being followed. My GPS malfunctioned within the first half-mile, and my phone lost signal shortly after that. The forest grew darker as I hiked, not from the time of day but from some quality in the light itself. Shadows fell at wrong angles, creating a landscape that looked normal at first glance but revealed its strangeness when studied closely. I found the farmstead ruins just before sunset. What remained of the Blackwood place was less a building than an impression of a building. The foundation stones were there, along with portions of walls that seemed to fade in and out of visibility. A well sat in what had once been the front yard, its stones forming a perfect circle around darkness so complete it seemed solid. And the shadows were indeed wrong. They moved independently of their sources, reaching across the ground with deliberate purpose. I watched a shadow cast by a dead tree stretch toward me like a searching finger, while the tree itself remained perfectly still. As I approached the main foundation, I began to understand what was happening. The farmstead existed in a state of partial reality. It was there, but not completely there, occupying a space between existing and not existing, and that partial existence was spreading, slowly consuming anything that came into contact with it. The Blackwood family hadn't been killed or abducted. They'd been partially erased from reality itself, and their incomplete existence had created a wound in the fabric of space-time. A wound that was slowly expanding, pulling more of the world into its state of uncertain being. I found them in the cellar. Or rather, I found what was left of them. 5 figures sat around a table that flickered between existing and not existing, their forms incomplete, their faces half erased. They looked up at me with eyes that held terrible awareness. "Doctor," one of them said in a voice like wind through empty spaces. "We've been waiting for someone who could understand." Understand what? What we did. What we became. What we're still becoming. The eldest figure, presumably Mr. Blackwood, gestured to the walls around us. Carved into the stone were symbols that hurt to look at directly, mathematical equations that my mind couldn't quite process. "We were farmers," he said. "Simple people. But we found something in the soil, something that didn't belong to this world. We tried to study it, to understand it." "What did you find?" "A fragment of somewhere else, a place where the laws of physics work differently, where existence itself is optional. We thought we could contain it, control it. Instead, it began to contain us." Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward, her face a shifting kaleidoscope of present and absent features. We became part of it. Not dead, not alive, but something in between. And our condition spread to anyone who stayed too long near our land. "The people in the sanctuary," I said. "They're becoming like you. Slowly, yes. The effect spreads through proximity and time. The longer someone stays connected to this place, the more they fade into our reality. Is there a cure? A way to reverse the process?" The Blackwood family exchanged glances that were sometimes there and sometimes not. "Only one," Mr. Blackwood said. "Someone would have to take our place, become the anchor that holds this pocket of unreality stable, contain it with their own existence." I understood what they were asking. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to seal the wound in reality, to prevent it from spreading further and consuming more innocent people. It would mean ceasing to exist in any meaningful way. Mrs. Blackwood warned. Not death, which is at least final, but endless partial existence, awareness without substance, thought without form. I thought of Jennifer, fading away in my RV, of the sanctuary residents, trapped between existence and void, of all the future victims who would stumble into this place seeking photographs or adventure and leave with pieces of themselves missing. If I do this, I said, the others will be freed? They'll become whole again? The active spread will stop, Mr. Blackwood confirmed. Those already affected will stabilize in their current state. They won't fade further, but they won't recover completely either. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I spent what felt like hours in that impossible cellar, learning the ritual that would transfer the anchor point from the Blackwood family to myself. They taught me the symbols, the words in languages that predated human speech, the mental discipline required to maintain conscious control over unreality. You don't have to do this, the youngest Blackwood daughter said. You could leave, forget you ever found us, live your life. I'm a doctor, I said. I took an oath to do no harm. Leaving this place to spread and consume more people would be the greatest harm I could imagine. The ritual itself was surprisingly simple. I carved my name into the cellar wall beside theirs, spoke the words they'd taught me, and felt reality shift around me like water finding a new level. The Blackwood family faded away with expressions of profound gratitude, finally released into whatever comes after existence. And I felt myself settling into their role, becoming the conscious anchor that held this pocket of unreality stable. I don't know how long I've been here. Time works differently in a place that exists between existing and not existing. Sometimes it feels like minutes, sometimes like decades. But I can sense the sanctuary residents, stable now in their incomplete states but no longer fading. I can feel the boundaries of the unreality, contained now, prevented from spreading further into the world. And sometimes, when new people approach the farmstead area, I can warn them away. Not directly, my voice doesn't carry the way it used to, but through subtle manipulations of shadow and light, sounds that suggest danger, an atmosphere of wrongness that sends sensible people back to safety. Gerald knows what happened. I've found ways to communicate with him, to let him know that the immediate danger has passed. He's updated the restricted area signs, made them more explicit about the dangers. The sanctuary residents have organized themselves into a support community, helping each other and any new arrivals adapt to their changed existence. It's not the retirement I planned, but in a strange way, it's the ultimate expression of my medical calling. I'm still helping people, still preventing suffering, still standing between the vulnerable and forces that would harm them. And sometimes, in the moments between existing and not existing, I think I can see Sarah, living her life, pursuing her career, gradually healing from the loss of her mother who simply vanished while camping. She's strong, resilient, building a good life despite the mystery of my disappearance. That knowledge makes the sacrifice worthwhile. If you're reading this, it means someone found the journal I kept during my final days of full existence. Maybe Gerald left it for future researchers, or maybe reality shifted just enough to let my words escape this place. The message is simple. Stay away from East Fork State Park's restricted areas. The immediate danger has passed, but scars remain. Shadows that move wrong, photographs that develop strangely, people who get lost in broad daylight, and somewhere between existing and not existing. A doctor stands guard, making sure that the wound in reality never reopens, never spreads beyond its current boundaries. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life, or something like life, that was needed. And, in the end, that's enough.